I live in a small village called Milam in Norfolk. It's a nice, quiet place, but it doesn't have much going for it. Honestly, I like it this way. I never grow tired of the scenic, countryside beauty, unblemished by the modern world. Milam is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. A one-pub town, as they say. The area doesn't attract too many tourists, which, again, is fine by me. If there's one thing I can't stand, it's the thought of us trying to cater to strangers. No, I'm not xenophobic. If you want to visit Milam, I'll gladly open my home to you. Hell, I'll even buy you a drink and spend the evening sharing stories. What I don't want are droves of tourists flooding the area, and the village trying to remodel itself and build new establishments to accommodate. I live here because it's quiet. If I wanted to navigate through clusters of tourists taking selfies, I'd move to London. But I digress. Milam is and always will be my home, but there's one thing about it that disturbs me. One thing you won't find in the papers or in those little United Kingdom tourist pamphlets. We have a history of people who've exhibited a rather strange set of behaviors. Aaron Cox. He was the latest victim of the affliction that has quietly plagued my village since the 1700s. No one knows exactly when it started, only that it's as much ingrained in our history as fibers are ingrained in a tapestry. It always starts the same way: chickens go missing, cows are found mutilated, and then someone breaks. This time, Aaron was the one who broke. I found him naked in my field one night, staring up at the sky and howling at the full moon. He had a wild look in his eyes. I dared not approach him, unsure of what to do. The village hadn't experienced this affliction since my parents' generation. I stood idly by and watched him from beyond an irrigation channel. Then, when the moon became masked behind a mass of clouds, he slowly walked away, as though nothing had happened. At the time, I had hoped it was nothing but drunken shenanigans, but I became more concerned the next day when I saw his wife Elizabeth, and asked if he'd gotten home all right. When I told her about the encounter, she grew more agitated. She dodged my questions, claimed he'd been out of town, and excused herself. Somehow, I had a feeling she knew more than she let on. That very same night, I heard the howling again. It echoed through the valley, giving the impression of multiple voices from different sources. Aaron was outside, staring up at the sky and waving his arms like a drowning man hailing a ship. He switched between mad laughter and eerie yowls, as though conversing with an unseen presence. I closed my shutters and tried to sleep, ignoring the ruckus outside. It only occurred to me in the morning to call his wife. When I finally did, she sounded flustered. She told me Aaron had come home that afternoon. Said he'd acted perfectly normal. They'd gone to bed together and, in bed, they remained until the morning. The hairs at the back of my neck stood. Was she lying to me, or was it the truth? If Aaron hadn't been in the field, then who had? That day, I asked around town if anyone had gone missing and if anyone had heard or seen the man in my field. No one had. The Williams had lost a few chickens, but they blamed foxes. They'd found a spot in the chicken wire fence where claws or fangs had cut through to allow entry. These things happened. With nothing to go on, I gave up my search and returned to my chores. As I lay my head on my pillow, I heard a commotion coming from my barn. My cows were screaming. Have you ever heard the noise they make when you take their calves away? It's a kind of panicked, higher-pitch yowl you wouldn't ever hear in any other circumstance. Well, that was the sound they were making, only louder and more panicked. I threw on a robe, grabbed a flashlight, and ran out into my barn. One of my cows was sprawled out in the middle of the central aisle, her throat ripped open with a jagged, messy gash. She was still breathing, still trying to emit that scream, but her sounds were muffled and gurgled. I knelt down in front of her and gently caressed her head to try and ease her pain. I wished I owned a shotgun so I could have put her out of her misery. Then I heard the crackle of dry straw coming from her stall, and a pathetic little whimper. I twisted my head towards her pen and saw the outline of something curled up in the corner. I shone my light towards it. Aaron Cox twitched as the beam of light hit him. His eyes glowed like those of a cat in the night, but he was otherwise normal. There was no fur, no claws, and no fangs. Just a scrawny man in his birthday suit. He let out a howl and bolted out of the pen on all fours, disappearing into the night to do God only knows what. I could hear his howls in the distance as I tended to my cow. Before long, I was pounding on the door of the Cox household. Elizabeth Cox answered. She looked tired, but her hair was still in place. She hadn't gone to bed. What's going on? I barked angrily. She smiled nervously, shifting her weight from foot to foot. I don't know what you're talking about. Are you alright? Like hell you don't. Where's Aaron? Or are you going to pretend he's in your bed again? I asked. She stiffened and gripped the hem of her shirt. Aaron's fine. It's none of your business. I stomped my foot on the ground. He made it my business when he killed Betsy. Elizabeth winced. I'm so sorry. He hasn't been himself lately, she trailed off, lowering her gaze in shame. Was he even with you yesterday, or was that a lie? I asked. She didn't answer. Do you know what's going on with him? I pressed. She paused, looking uncomfortable. She moved aside and motioned for me to follow her into the living room. I did. It's the moon, she whispered. The moon? She nodded. He said he can hear it calling to him. I know it sounds mad. Please, I don't want him to get locked up. It'll pass. I'm sure it'll pass. He's just sick. Haven't your parents ever told you about this? It happens here sometimes. Her eyebrows came together. She held her breath and tensed. Sometimes they get better on their own. I leaned against the wall, remembering the stories my parents had told me. Stories of people going mad. Tiny outbreaks of some sort of disease, they thought. It hadn't happened in so long. It was assumed they were cases of mad cow disease of something of the sort, but back then, they hadn't had the tools to test for it yet. Could this be what was happening now? Aaron needs to get help, I told her. She shook her head. It'll pass, I promise. I don't want to risk him getting institutionalized. I promise, I'll keep him inside from now on. I relented. As long as he stayed away from my livestock, it didn't really matter to me what he did. Besides, I didn't want to be the one who had one of the village's beloved citizens sent to the loony bin. It would get out. People would talk. I would get shunned, and so would Elizabeth. I didn't want that for her or for me, so I promised to keep quiet. Still, I couldn't help thinking of what she said. Or rather, what Aaron told her. The moon. He said it spoke to him. I'd seen him howl to it twice now. I'd seen him so completely entranced by it that he didn't notice my presence at all. I'm sure you've heard the term a lunatic before, right? Do you know the origins of the word? Lunatic comes from the Latin word luna, the moon. They used to think the moon caused mental illnesses. Something about its light keeping people awake at night. Making people lose their minds. And when you think about it, is it that impossible? If the moon is strong enough to influence the tides, just imagine what it can do to the human body. Think about it. We're comprised of around 70% water. Really, it's almost silly to think that the moon can't affect us. And in Milam, a little village so far from the bright city lights, the moon seems to glow twice as strong. What I'm trying to say is that, when I woke up early this morning with blood and chicken feathers caked on my lips. When I felt how sore my throat was. When I saw the moon shining through the clouds and felt the distant, magnetic hum it emitted. I understood. It's beautiful. The curve of it, the deep craters that scar its silver surface. They leave me with this feeling of admiration welling inside of me. They leave me with a desire, no, a need, to go outside and greet it. It shines so bright. It's so beautiful. I understand now. There's nothing wrong with getting a little moonstruck.